Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Let's see. I do have an announcement. May 27th, there'll be a webcast at 11 a.m. Eastern Time exploring the latest attacks against DNS and the latest techniques that make it possible to discover and disrupt attacks. On June 3rd, our webcast at 11 a.m., you'll learn pen testing tools, why every organization should be using them regularly, as well as some insights as to the latest features and integrations with Cobalt Strike and Core Impact. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register today and /on demand to explore the entire archive of webcasts and technical training. I think that's all of our announcements. And we're ready to dig into the news this week. Did you guys hear there was some kind of pipeline attack?
The new? What's the singular of news? Isn't there just one story this
There's
week?
just new.
The new.
Nude.
Yeah.
There's just one nude.
It's the new segment.
The new segment.
It's been an exposure of a pipeline. That sounds
What
bad.
kind of pipeline are we talking about?
That sounds really bad. Where to start? It was Russia, and it's all Biden's fault, and there's a gas shortage. Okay, none of those things are really true. I mean, it was Russia, but I don't necessarily know what state.
Someone's going to clip that out and totally use that.
It is totally gonna
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things about the hack is that the dark side ransomware guide, right? That's the guys that did it. They're a ransomware as a service provider, so it's like they sell a service. It could be anybody using it to ransomware people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is like when you start to talk about ransomware, especially ransomware as a service, right? Like when they start to attribute it to a particular ransomware strand and then try to provide attribution to that ransomware strand. That doesn't provide anybody any value because, again, this is ransomware as a service. It's like right in the name. Thus, you can pay to use that platform.
I don't think there was a nation state that went to DarkSide and said, I want you to go disrupt the pipeline and then give us the ransom for it. Like, none of those things really add up. No, the report said the computer systems that actually run the pipeline were shut down, so they didn't get ransomware. So they didn't actually ransomware the systems that were responsible for the pipeline, from what I heard as well.
If you're a nation state, like, and you have access to a pipeline, you're not going to do ransomware.
No.
First, full stop right there. That's dumb. Second, like, you
might to cover your tracks. You might to just disrupt it and make it seem like it was ransomware, and not really cash in the bug bounty. Like,
that's high visibility. That's that's the trade of.
That's not Petya in a nutshell. What we can theorize about that, but. This doesn't seem like. I mean, FireEye, Flashpoint, all companies that like have really awesome researchers and like have their finger on the pulse of what's happening have like said, no, this really isn't like doesn't really look like a nation state attack. It really looks like a group whose sole purpose was to make money. Maybe not sole purpose, but their number one goal. Maybe they've got a list of goals, but number one is to make money, and it sounds like they're doing a really good job of that. Colonial paid $5 million. That's just what I read on the internet. I mean, who knows if they paid what they paid.
The bucket too. Like in comparison to like shutting down a pipeline or gas shortage or pushing. Obviously, their stocks have done well in the recent shorting of that. So again, this goes back to, this seems like a target of opportunity, and I think they just recently released, there's 3 other people that have had the same thing happen, like from the same group. Like they haven't released it publicly, but there's someone in Canada, there's a European business or engineering firm, and there's one other one. So this sounds like just people that have gross security misconfigurations and left something open, and an easy way to make money off of those is, and low risk, is ransomware, right?
DarkSide has reported, and this is from Krebs on Security, they say DarkSide has shown itself to be fairly ruthless with victim companies that have deep pockets, but can be reasoned with. So Intel 471 observed a negotiation with the DarkSide crew, and a $15 billion U.S. victim company was hit with a $30 million ransomware demand in January of this year. And in this incident, the victim's efforts at negotiating a lower payment ultimately reduced the ransom demand by almost 2/3. Still a pretty hefty payment.
So
that is.
I want to ask everybody that's here assembled, our fine colleagues, are any of you remotely surprised that this happened?
Well, no. And
not in the slightest.
The other report was, and I don't know how true this is, but someone claimed to be the pen test or one of the security assessors, right, of Colonial, and basically said like security wasn't their strong suit, which doesn't surprise. To your point, John, right, doesn't surprise us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you all saw the job posting for a cybersecurity manager at Colonial, which all kind of leads to it wasn't really the focus at this company. Which, I mean, but they're not alone in that. I mean, I don't necessarily fault them. I mean, we've all seen that a 1,000 times in our career, right? Companies that just like, security's not like in the culture. It's not a top priority. But then now you're in the global headlines, and now it's going to be a priority, certainly. But is it going to be a priority for other companies that aren't in the headlines? Probably not. Which is probably why we're not surprised that this happened.
I mean, a few weeks ago, I forgot who we had on the show, but the person who was focused on ICS and SCADA, we've all been there. We've done assessments in companies that have SCADA operations, have ICS operations, and we've watched and observed people using their servers as workstations and not knowing the difference and not understanding the basics of security. And so, I don't know the insides of anything that Colonial Pipeline's doing, but based on other experiential data, it doesn't surprise me. None of this surprises me.
And it's just the fact that it's a gas pipeline this time, right? Like, how many companies have we had in the news that have gotten ransomware recently, or all the ones that we don't know about or aren't headlines? Like, this is just another ransomware case. It just happened to be a gas line provider. And thus, once it made that headline, now you've got a gas shortage, and now it's national news because it directly affects the end consumer in some way, which it probably really doesn't, but it does because they freaked out.
Right.
Yeah, it does if you're living next door to the guy that's storing the gas in a plastic bag.
Yep.
I mean,
in his car.
So is that how we get change to happen, is we make this directly affect the general consumer across all boards and all verticals? Like, is ransomware a bad thing at this point?
It was the impetus behind that new executive order that came out yesterday. I mean, there's a cause and effect.
Well, hold that thought, Lee. We'll get
we'll get to it.
We'll run. Let's run this to ground, and then we'll talk about the executive order. My question to the group is for and I don't know the answer to this. Is this a private company or is this
it's private
public
company.
utility? It's a private company.
Private.
So what security regulatory standard compliance regime are they beholden to?
Potentially NERC SIP.
Potentially NERC SIP.
Tyler, Joff, is that?
No,
if
I think
any of them
they're part of NERC SIP.
Probably not.
Just based on what they are, no.
Is NERC SIP more just power? That's just power?
Power and nuclear.
Power and nuclear,
yeah,
right?
That's right. It's more electrical. You're right.
So let's just on a whim think that, and I can be proven wrong, but they're probably not beholden to just about anything from a security, cybersecurity perspective, and that is part of the problem. most companies in the private sector, unless they're told to do something, and I'm on an NSA alumni mailing list, and we've been talking about this today, and what everybody keeps bringing up is accountability, and I keep thinking, accountability in the private sector is spelled COMPLIANCE.
We talked about this on Enterprise Security Weekly, Jeff, and Adrian actually has statistics. Almost all of the critical infrastructure companies in the U.S. are like privately held. Like, it's not the government that runs power and water and gas pipelines. Like, these are all mostly privately held, or if they're not, fall under the jurisdiction of your local municipality, right? So like somewhere in Idaho, right, where they're supplying water, like maybe that water company is run by the local municipality somewhere, right? But for the most part, it's not the federal government that runs. So the federal government can't like regulate itself and do things like CMMC, because critical infrastructure is basically private companies and or municipalities that fall outside of the jurisdiction. And then we also talked about compliance in this sense. And, my whole thing is like, I like that PCI does have some teeth, right? Like there's some good, mostly negative reinforcement there of like, you should be PCI compliant, because if you're not and you have a breach, like there's consequences. Like what is the consequence for critical infrastructure? I mean, most of critical infrastructure's business model is flipped on its head. With water and power, they want you to use less of their product. Like, what kind of other company that wants to make money tells their customers to use less of their product, right? The power company and water company is like, you must conserve and not use as much of our product. And so I think that really makes, I would love to hear your thoughts, Jeff, from a compliance standpoint. Like, what could we put in place to help regulate these industries that would be provide enough of an incentive that they would do security similar to things like PCI and other standards? Well,
and this is where we might segue into the executive order that came out today, because I think you're sort of asking the right question, but to me, my take on the question, because it's always good to answer a question with another question, it makes you look smart. My take on it is not so much, how do we motivate companies to do the right thing, and how do we give them, positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement in terms of compliance. But there's got to be a compelling reason to do that. I mean, I always chuckle when in the former times we would go to hacker conferences, security conferences, and people love to talk about Big Brother and NSA and the government and all the infringement and EFF and the human rights. Not picking on EFF, our privacy rights and everything. But when it boils down to, we got to do something about this, we need the government to intervene with regulation. There is no other way to do it, and it's got to be. It's not good enough to just for the government to come and regulate. It's got to. It's going to cost money, and we're very often talking about companies that are not structured in the current way that they conduct business to afford it. And so when it's a utility, I mean, we're already experiencing up and down the East Coast, I don't know if it's hit Boston or not, but the pipeline is shut down, so the gas prices are going up. If you're an economist, you understand how that works. But when there's an oil spill, gas prices go up. Why? Because these companies are passing on the cost ultimately to the consumer, and that's when it starts to be political, because people have their vested interests and they have their ideas and notions, and if somebody wants to pay for it, I don't want it to be me. It's okay if it's you, but I don't want it to be me. And that's where something like the executive order that came out today, and somebody posted it on the mailing list early today and said, hey, here it is, given everything that we know and all of our collective backgrounds and experiences, what is anybody's take on what positive, does anybody have any idea of something good that come out of this? What do you think? And I simply responded, nothing. But maybe I'm being too optimistic.
No, I think largely that's the fact that it is an executive order and not a law or a bill that has been passed, right? So therefore, it is limited as to what it can dictate, right?
But not even that. If you've read it, and I haven't read it cover to cover, but I kind of skimmed
I
through
read
it
parts
to
of
get
it too.
the titles and everything.
Yep.
I mean, it's very comprehensive, and it's very government. I've seen this before from the government. Here's all the right things to do. This is what needs to be done.
It's like basically like people should look into doing these things is basically kind of the gist of it, right?
Right. It's not very prescriptive.
Yeah.
Not prescriptive, and what somebody else pointed out was there's no accountability.
Right.
Somebody's got to make people do it.
It isn't the executive order, and I might be wrong because I haven't read it cover to cover. I've just read articles about it, but isn't it also kind of reactive focused? Like you must report things.
Yes.
Well, isn't it?
Oh, there was a good portion of that. Yep.
You know,
notification, sharing of information. So there was a lot of rehashing of, I think somebody pulled together a lot of, what have we written about cybersecurity over the last 10 years? Let's throw it all together in this executive order because it'll make us look like we've really applied a lot of thought to it.
So it's executive order cyber soup, and okay, great. Government often is highly motivated to, to get in the media and say we're doing something.
Yeah, but I mean, the sharing of information isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. However, it doesn't compel critical infrastructure companies to take action. Like, okay, maybe they find out that there are attacks going on because information sharing is more prevalent. But if you're a water company in Florida or you're a pipeline company, doesn't have a huge focus on cybersecurity, you see that report, like, okay, what are you going to do anything about it? To Jeff's point, like, just nothing really makes you do anything about it, right?
No, there needs to be a stick. There needs to be a compliance stick. It
can't be fines, right? Like we can fine Facebook, albeit you can debate how much that actually impacts Facebook, but you can fine a company like Facebook and go, you committed heinous atrocities in terms of privacy, and therefore you will pay $10 million, and Facebook's like, all right, like, where do I write the check? You know what I mean? Like, there is a consequence, but it's not. Yeah, it's not. It is. It's like a $20 bill to Facebook, right?
So there's two things I'd like to bring up for us to discuss. The first is, and this is a real concern I have, having lived in both worlds, in public sector and private sector. I, like many people, left the public sector for the more lucrative private sector, make more money, was going to get rich and retire when I was 40. That didn't happen. But, I found a passion and I found a niche, and, largely like the private sector because it is driven from a financial perspective. Stuff happens. Not all the stuff that we want to happen, but projects begin and end, and you get paid, and you move on, and it's a lot more intentional because the bottom line is it's a financial thing ultimately. In the public sector, not the case. Coming out of the DoD, it was all about national defense, and roughly speaking, the risk is the risk of human life, whether it's the military, our armed services members, diplomats, citizens abroad and at home, and so on and so forth. And in the 25 years since I've left, the DHS has come along, and now there's the CISA, and NIST has gotten more teeth than. NIST was a laughingstock from NSA's perspective 25 years ago, just saying. But and I know a lot of people that are, come from these groups, work in these groups, and they're very passionate because they have a very real mission. The mission is very real in terms of national defense in this day and age, not talking about all the hype and everything, but just the mission of, there are threat actors out there that want to do harm to us economically and politically and all sorts of things. That's very different than what motivates companies in the private sector. And there's this third wrinkle now because we talked about it a few months ago with the Florida water treatment plant, publicly traded, public utility. now this pipeline, and maybe this is generic to industrial control systems, but there seems to be this middle ground where it's not really completely government, it's not really completely private sector, it's somewhere in the middle. So there's these two worlds that one side thinks they know what to do and want to tell, the public sector says, oh, we got all the answers, but they're typically not the most well paid, and they don't have the best and the brightest, because the best and the brightest go out into the private sector and get paid more to do stuff there because the rewards are more tangible and more immediate, whatever the motivation is. So, different motivations, different sets of people. What's traditionally, in my experience, been sort of second tier is trying to call the shots and rule the shots and trying to pass that on to the private sector. And as Paul, you alluded to, you can't do that when you're the government, or it's difficult.
Not without passing a law, right?
Not without passing a law, and then you have this middle ground where it's kind of a mix. My concern is, how do you sort all that out and make sense of any of it? How do we expect a government regulation to come and solve private sector problems when the orientation is public sector, national defense type stuff? That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not optimistic, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's going to take time. And just making appointments is a start. President Biden has made several appointments. The briefing I watched, I think someone linked to it in our internal Slack channel. I believe it was the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cybersecurity in Neuberger.
Yep.
Which was a new appointment. And I mean, that's just the beginning. I mean, but these appointments really, they can't pass laws, right? Like, laws in the U.S. are passed in a completely different way, and would have to have some teeth to it, right? For critical infrastructure.
And Neuberger and Chris Inglis, and the names of the other two escape me, but people that are well respected within the crowd that I'm running with,
right.
Both this mailing list and this the Wednesday night happy hour that I do.
Pulled someone. So the only one that I had was Rob Joyce. Came back to service. He's NSA's new cybersecurity director.
Right. So all these names were mentioned today. But my issue is, they're coming from this problem without having the context. They're coming out from one side. They haven't seen the full picture. Because
you have to regulate
the other side.
Yeah, you have to regulate private industry. This isn't a federal government. This isn't NSA needs more security. FBI needs to do more for security and in international cybersecurity investigations. Like, those are federal government things that they could affect change on. We're talking about, in the context of this pipeline attack, is how do you get the private sector to be more secure, right?
I mean, isn't it ultimately, and I think we would all sort of generally agree on this, that we need some sort of standard to be published for industrial control systems across the country? I mean, because if you had a pretty broad compliance standard that was published there, that kind of like PCI, right, but only industrial control focused, that set a minimum standard, we could knock out a lot of these issues with probably not too much pain, right? Because it's not too far to go. Yeah, there'd have to be money to be spent, but
the problem is we know in security law you can't just throw money at it. I mean, the government did do that in certain capacities with the telco providers to build out the internet. There were a lot of grant programs, and the government helped a lot to build our communications infrastructure. I think it was Corey, what's his name? Sci-fi author Corey. What's his last name? It escapes. When he came on the show, you know what I'm talking about, right? When he came on the show, he talked about, we were talking about regulation. He's like, dude, like, regulation is not bad. Like, the reason we have the communications infrastructure is because the government came out and offered incentives to build out that infrastructure because there's a cost. That's something that you can throw money at and there's enough incentive. With security, as we know, like, you can't just, okay, we're going to write a check for $1 million for a certain critical infrastructure company. You need to improve security. Like, that's only a small part of it.
That's not what I was calling for, though. I mean, I think the community needs to throw down another compliance standard that is kind of like PCI for industrial controls for this, for critical infrastructure, and say, you have to. That's the way the regulation is. You have to adhere to this.
Or maybe if you do, there's incentives to get funding for that, right?
Throw an incentive out there, exactly, to say, if you do, then hey, you get this and this and this and this. Maybe, I don't know, whatever it might be, environmental, carbon credits or something.
Right. Because what we don't want is we don't want everyone who lives in the U.S. to have all of our bills go up. We don't want to pay more for gas and water and electricity, right? No one wants that. That would probably have detrimental effects to the economy.
To be clear, though, there are regulatory bodies for gas and natural oil, right? Like these bodies fall under certain federal or state regulations. Whether that's
there has to be some regulations, right?
IEC, ISA,
like for water, like
natural gas.
There has to be someone who's looking at the water we drink has to be of a certain level. Like there must be testing. I'm sure there is stuff like that.
Yeah, there's regulatory bodies. Those bodies just don't fall. Like they usually fall under one of the NIST kind of frameworks, but they're not quite as mature. And even if they are, like you said, there's not a huge incentive. They will find ways to be bare minimum compliant,
right,
and still meet that without the incentive of actually doing more. Because we know bare minimum is not going to cover everything. It's going to cover ransomware. Like, let's be clear. Like some of this.
Yeah, I was going to say bare minimum might not be so bad.
You're not going to wipe anything
out. If we can get them to a minimum standard,
right?
That's a whole lot better than we are now.
I mean, PCI didn't. I mean, this is all PCI's fault. Because PCI didn't wipe out. It is. I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but I'll kind of make a case for that, right? Like PCI made it much more difficult to commit credit card fraud. And credit card fraud still happens, but just like not as often. And
it's not the most lucrative, easy money.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
It's a higher bar. And so what do attackers do? They've turned to crypto mining and they've turned to ransomware because committing credit card fraud is too much of a pain in the ass now. So it's all.
It was Cory Doctorow, by the way, Paul.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Said it was Cory Doctorow.
Cory Doctorow. I was blanking on the name.
Doctorow, and Adrian mentioned it in Discord. Yes. We were both trying to tell you at the same time.
I was trying to get in there. Also, the four names I want to give proper credit: Chris Inglis, Ann Newberger, Jen Easterly, and then Rob Joyce. All people that are very well respected.
And what do you happen to know their roles? Like what their titles are? I flaked on some of that.
Not all. I'd have to Google it.
Jen Easterly is the new director of CISA. Took over for Chris Krebs.
There you go.
Yep.
Okay.
And Inglis, National Cybersecurity Director.
Okay.
And Ann Newberger, National Security Advisor for Cybersecurity.
Yep.
I don't pretend to know like what the differences are in those roles.
I have no idea either.
Yeah.
But it's the government, and so there's likely to be some sort of overlap and fiefdom building. Not saying that government's perfect or anything, but you almost touched on what I wanted to bring up as my second concern, and you didn't go there, but we could in terms of blaming PCI as an industry, as a career, as what we do. In terms of security, and we've talked at length about it. Really, is about data security, and Joff brought it up in the last segment. The whole data security triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Here's my other concern: is we've spent probably 90% of our resources over the last 25 years focused on keeping secrets, which is the confidentiality.
Protecting data, right.
We touch on integrity every once in a while, but this ransomware type of attack is really bringing the availability thing to the forefront.
Yes.
And as a whole industry, we are not architected to go after that. Now, why I mentioned that in the context of PCI. PCI could care less whether you can conduct business or not.
It's a data security standard. It is the data security standard, DSS.
But it's mostly focused on the confidentiality. Don't have the data stolen.
Right.
Now, the beauty though of availability, even though we're not, and when I say architected, we don't have it in our language. We don't have it in our vocabulary to talk specifically to availability, I think, the way we should. But fortunately, all those security 101 things that you do to protect data in terms of keeping secrets probably are going to help you along with the protection against the availability things.
Sure. Because it's interesting.
So
Jeff,
it goes back to do the basics, and you're probably going to be okay.
Right. If you're protecting the data, you're also protecting yourself from that security operational risk or availability, as you coin it, right? As you phrase it, I should say.
And specifically, and I never hear anybody talking about it. Well, not to the degree I think we should. Why do these ransomware attacks work? It's very often they're exploiting known vulnerabilities where patches are available. Yes, no.
Yeah, a lot of it's email phishing too. Living off the land.
It's email phishing, but the phishing launches something that exploits something, or is the phishing launching code that just executes?
It's launching for the most part.
We actually talked about this in ESW as well. Most ransomware attacks are dropping a dropper, right? And now we have an initial foothold, and then they can pick: do I want to crypto mine? Do I want to deploy some ransomware malware based on my dropper, and then go from there? And usually that's when it changes hands from criminal group to criminal group. Like, I think there's criminal groups that are solely focused on, like, I kind of thought of it as like sitting back and like if you're running Core Impact, right, and just waiting for that new agent deployed message, like, cool, I got a dropper. Right now, I'm going to go sell that, and then the person I sell it to is going to deploy the ransomware, and I'm going to take a cut of that. And if there's probably a lot more money than we think changing hands. I mean, I heard a news report that cybersecurity or crime in cybersecurity is a $1 trillion, multi-trillion-dollar industry. So, like, if you can ransomware someone for $5 or $10 million, if I'm giving you the access to that, maybe I'm taking a couple of million, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty good for me, just sitting back and running a phishing campaign. I don't know, Tyler Joff, like how much time you spend in your average phishing campaign? A couple $1 million is probably a good return on investment, right?
You're right. The resale of these these kits that are going around to be leveraged by different groups. I mean, there's a whole vertical industry there, which is something that frankly the pen testing industry doesn't really have. So it is quite a different world. But I still come back to the fact, and I think Jeff just said it, that if you take care of the data security standard side of it, what essentially PCI has done, if you actually had a equivalent standard that was required, maybe coupled with a compliance law of some sort for these industries, that would really knock down a lot of this, because we know that these things. The industry is just not aware. I mean, it's like they said, security is not their game. It just isn't.
There's one there. I'm thinking back a couple years ago in San Bruno, California. There was a huge PG&E gas pipeline explosion in a neighborhood, burned down the whole place, and it was because they weren't doing proper maintenance on the controls that regulate the pressure and bleed off of their natural gas pipelines. The regulatory body was the Public Utility Commission, and they're the ones that levied the fine not to be passed on to the customers, even though it's a privately held company. Pretty sure all of our gas bills went up in the next few years to get that fine back. My point was, I think in that case, the PUC inspection, the mandated inspection process was not looking at IT, it was looking at physical stuff, and it's ignoring the piece that's relevant to this story, is that we have got an oversight body, but if they're not looking in the right place, it doesn't matter that they are in the oversight role.
Yeah, and we don't want to pass, the consumers, us as citizens here in the U.S., don't want to foot the bill for the poor cybersecurity hygiene of our critical infrastructure.
Correct.
In your example, nor do we want to foot the bill, Lee, for, as in your example, the other, any other kind of gross negligence that may be committed by infrastructure companies. That they should foot that. Why should we foot that bill?
No. So we got to bolster what we have. The other thing I was thinking about is that nice thing about the CISA weighing in on this one. They've been really working on industry partnerships, and that's good. People need relationships to get the information they need. I don't know about threat sharing. That's going to require clearances, but I'd like to see more of that. More relationships with people that are really plugged in.
Yeah, I'd like to see. I mean, guidance and advice is one thing, but actually fixing these issues is the other thing, and that's the point I think we're all kind of saying we need to get to. Is it's great if you've got an infrastructure company, critical infrastructure, that okay, now they know about all their weaknesses, they know what to look for, but now you got to look for it and go fix it. And as we all know, that's the hard part. That's harder sometimes than doing the pen test.
That's why all these blinky lock box lights and companies that are selling the magic snake oil, that's why they do so well, because companies are looking to fix this. Not everybody's not doing something. There's just not a good solution unless you get back to the hard stuff, and that's doing the good fundamentals, starting from the beginning, building programs, things that take time and effort, rather than just money and blinky boxes.
Did we cover that enough for you, Jeff?
Well, I said, it either needed to be. Tonight. We're not fixing the problem, and rather than rehash all the same old stuff, which we've done to some extent, I think the bottom line is a lot of organizations out there aren't equipped. They're not. It's not that they don't want to be. It's not in their budget, and nobody's making them. And I think that's the start of the problem. I've been to many companies where you talk to the people in the trenches. They know what their problems are. We've just talked about that. They know what they need to do to fix it. They know what tools they need. It was one of the fun parts about being a QSA for many years with PCI, because I would go in and say, "Hey, look, I know you know what you need. Tell me what you need. Tell me where your problems are. I'll stamp it with PCI, and guess what? You'll get what you want. Try me." And they would get it. And then we were buds. And then I would find out all the things that they were doing wrong. But, I'm good at what I do. I'm not gonna know your network and know where all your problems are in the week that I spend on site. Back in the days when I would actually go on site, you know where your problems are. Everybody knows where their problems are. The problem is more, they would tell you getting management to cough up the money, but it's an economic problem.
But it's also a continuous thing. I think it ties into my story number 4, Jeff. What you're talking about is that also you can't just go to a company, critical infrastructure or not, and go, all right, let's fix the problems. You got to build a process to do that in a continuous basis. And Acunetics, I believe, wrote this article that ad hoc scanning is not enough. It's one thing to go in and assess a point in time, even fix at a point in time. That's still just a point in time. And maybe critical infrastructure is a little more static in that sense, but it's certainly not moving in that direction. It's moving to be a more dynamic environment. It's moving more into the cloud, quite frankly, which is scary, perhaps. But it's never just a point in time thing. We've always said security is a process. And that's kind of the frightening thing for me, is that we could start to fix these issues, but if we don't enable organizations to build a process, to build a culture, to build these things in and have a constant refresh cycle, and constantly monitor and monitor when their infrastructure changes, that could be bad. And I think that's why ad hoc scanning isn't enough. You have to constantly scan your environment, because it not only does your environment change, but new threats in what you have also come out all the time. We cover it here every week. There's new vulnerabilities and exploits all the time. Right.
And the article is highlighting what to me is yet another problem in our industry is the world, our customer base, the society. When they think of security, they just want to be secure. They want to achieve that state. And for a lot of us, for many years, we ran around trying to get people to that state.
Yep.
And we talk it with all the con talks and all the ramblings and rants that go on. We talk about getting to that state of secure. But as you say, really the name of the game is continuous. It's security is a verb. It's something you do. It's an ongoing thing. It's not something you make the one-time investment and you set it up and you're done. The problem is everybody wants that. We know the reality is that's not how you do it.
Right.
And we're coming at it like this.
You got to make that a cost account for business and for management. They have to understand this isn't that ongoing process and that ongoing accrual and cost account that's going to continually cost them money and improvement. And as once they realize that from a business standpoint, I think they can wrap their head around it and digest it better, rather than, hey, we're trying to get to secure. It costs us $5 million. Like, here's $5 million to go get there. Why aren't we secure now? Like, they think that one-time investment, because that's how it's been pitched to them, and they only understand it that way because we've not articulated that properly. We have to be better about making this a part or a function of the business, just as accounting costs money, HR costs money, hiring people costs money. That's a net negative account income, right? You have to make sure that they understand the business language and how this process actually works, and it's an ongoing process.
I think it's also important for us not to oversell it. And what I mean by that is, we don't want to come in and propose as security professionals some sort of solution for these companies that is way, way technologically above their capability and probably too much security, right? I think what's really, really important in this sort of situation is to come in and propose a growth path that they can get on, that is achievable and sustainable for them, and to do it in a very mature and sensible way. Because if we don't do that, there's going to be that immediate denial and rejection, and that's not going to be healthy for anybody.
I think there's another piece too, and that is that they've also got to understand their risks and interdependencies. That, when they where are things going to go south if something goes down? I mean, the pipeline story, their IT systems went down, but it shut down their SCADA system because they lost control of it. Did anybody map that risk out? You move your accounting system to the cloud. Have you thought about what the availability or bandwidth to your network out is? It's not just security. You got to look at the whole system and figure out where you have failure points, and then secure the hell out of it, and have plans for when they fail, because they will fail.
Or attackers will find a new hole in something, right? I mean, that's
absolutely.
I think that segues
like
nicely.
Wi-Fi?
Like Wi-Fi, like frag attacks, which is interesting because this is like a new old attack. So a couple of sources, Larry was one. What we're talking about is basically there's a list of advisories, right? But one in particular is the ability to inject I'm reading from the article, an unencrypted Wi-Fi frame by carefully constructing a frame. This can, for instance, be abused to intercept client traffic by tricking the client into using a malicious DNS server, which I thought was an interesting way to execute this attack. And so I believe Josh Wright talked about this 10 years ago, is what Larry said. Cedric Blanchard, who passed away in a skydiving accident, I believe. Is that the one?
No.
I think, was he the one that was involved with Backtrack as well? There was one of the early, I think it was Cedric. He passed away, I believe, in a skydiving accident. He was the author of Wi-Fi Tap, and someone also said that Wi-Fi Tap had this ability in that tool to basically exploit this vulnerability, which is now coming to life and has a website and a logo and a song and a dance and all that stuff. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying this isn't necessarily new. These are things we kind of knew about Wi-Fi that maybe weren't as publicized as they needed to be. And that's my extent of it. I was going to rely on Larry to provide more color. If anyone else has more they would like to add, I am all ears.
So they claim that some of these are flaws in the basic protocols themselves, and others are flaws in the way they're implemented. But in order to exploit them, you've got to basically be on top of the device. You can't. This is not something you're going to do from across the street even with your Pringles can. So it's not a stop the world, but I think have to see revisions in the standards to get rid of some of these. And I'm not sure after 10 years of them being there, they're going to be a change like that. I mean, that's too foundational a change. But secure implementations, those should be resolved. I mean, those guys should come out with patches, but they'll probably come out with a buy our new model. It's not vulnerable instead pitch.
And I think a lot of the mitigating factors, like you said, based on how this is working, you have to be very close to the device. And a lot of the good systems have things like AirWatch or brute force or deauth protection via like air marshalling or one of the other ones. So there are ways to provide some level of protection against some of this. So there's there's some limited use cases to how you have to do this, but I see this actually expanding.
You've got to be at the 802.11 layer.
Yep.
Because like Lee said, they're not going to fix it in the protocol, so you have to have something that operates at the 802.11 frame layer to be able to, much like ARP, right? Like, because you're not going to fix ARP, but you can have external tools and systems and processes that help prevent attacks, but those are external. And I think, Tyler, what you're talking about is basically the same thing for 802.11.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's going to be the saving grace, and that's also going to make this probably a bigger issue later on down the road when people figure out how to do this differently. And relying on these mitigating technologies.
So just a note, Cedric Blanchard was the author of Wi-Fi Tap, and he did pass away at 37 in a skydiving accident in France. We interviewed him on the show. I didn't know that. He was an awesome security researcher, did a lot with wireless, wrote some of the web cracking tools, was involved with Backtrack back when it was Backtrack before it became Kali. So yeah, he was awesome.
I mean, we could almost do a segment on this one. It could be really interesting if we could get some demos going.
Yeah, I'm sure Larry's working on it. Maybe not as we speak.
We know him so well.
Yes, but he's definitely working on it. What else we got in here? Those were the big stories. Oh, Apple. So apparently, I don't remember this attack, to be honest with you, but there was a supply chain attack against Xcode. So basically someone stood up an Xcode kind of download site, and the version of Xcode, the development framework that you would use to develop iOS applications and Mac OS apps had backdoors in it.
Right.
And there was a court case against Epic Games. Epic Games and Apple have been going at it for a while, and I don't pretend to know some of the details there. They escape me at the moment. But in emails presented during Epic Games versus Apple court proceedings revealed new details about this attack. It turns out nearly 128 million iOS users downloaded the apps containing the XcodeGhost malware, which was put in there via the supply chain attack against Xcode. Apple kept this malware attack secret and did not share the impact's full details. Also in the article, it says did not notify those 128 million users, and they have emails basically showing that Apple employees were like, yeah, that's a lot of users to email, like we can't do that.
What the hell?
No surprises there.
I mean, I remember they did the Xcode updates because of stuff like this, but I didn't realize it gotten apps deployed to 128 million devices.
That's a lot to just sweep under. Like, there's a big rug at Apple that they take a lot of the security vulnerabilities and they just sweep it under.
Well, you need a big rug.
A big rug. It's in the shape of an Apple and Apple headquarters, and that's the one. Like, it's hollow underneath, and just sweeping that security vulnerability stuff right under there. Nothing to see here.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of devices. Especially considering, although they push pretty heavily to get people to the new platform, whatever that is. So I can see kind of this inside of their framework of design. Even the iPhone X, there are certain security updates you're not going to get for that, and thus you should probably move to the next one.
Right.
And I don't know if it was the X in particular, but there's a ton of precedence. That's just the Apple way of doing it. Move to the new thing to be secure.
Yep. And no ports on anything. I think the next Apple device is going to be nothing to plug into. No ports. It's my prediction.
That's probably not far off, honestly.
Right? I mean, you think about it. If you've got wireless charging, and Apple's done this before, they've made changes, which is weird. And Apple really doesn't capitalize on the kind of accessories thing. They kind of leave that to other companies, which I always found a little weird. But they definitely could make a new iPhone and have no ports, because, I mean, there's no headphone port on it. Your only port left is your charging port. And if you've got a wireless charger, why do you need a port? Maybe you interface with it to change your phone wirelessly like you would when you get a new phone. And maybe they build ways into their in Mac OS where wirelessly you can connect to the phone if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
And then why do you need ports in your Mac device?
Yeah, you do.
That's going to open a whole new can of worms, I think.
Maybe you get one Thunderbolt port. That's it. I'm thinking it's one.
I don't even see that, right?
Could be none.
for what like again, they're going to push you to whatever the latest thing is, which is going to be, I mean, you have Bluetooth, you've got AirDrop, you've got your AirPods or whatever, Bluetooth technology they're going to use in near field. Like there's really not a great use case for wires once they kind of get through some of the hinges of getting consumers to buy into that.
Right.
I mean, you get all the magnetic stuff now too. So
I think they've been grooming it. It's coming.
Yeah. Well, it still amazes me that the smartphone and tablet manufacturers with the ports have still got a device you can drop in the water and it's going to be okay. I mean, that just blows my mind. Imagine if you don't have the ports.
Yeah, then you can take it diving with you. It's going to be awesome.
Hot damn. Let's go diving.
Because every time I go diving, I'm like 20 feet down. I'm like, shit, I need to text somebody.
I need
to tweet.
I need to make a tweet. Here's another atrocity. So the biggest ISPs paid 8.5 million fake FCC comments opposing net neutrality. I hadn't kept up with the latest in the net neutrality battle, but there was the repeal in December 2017, which had me up in arms. I just like the internet should be a free and open place. If you're a content creator, much like we are, you want net neutrality, right? But in this particular case, all of the fake comments. So every industry-funded research found that 98.5% of genuine comments opposed Ajit Pai, who was the director of the FCC. Right, I think Biden appointed someone else, I believe, opposed the deregulatory plan. But today's report reveals the details about how many comments were fake and how the broadband industry was involved. It's like basically the people that would benefit from repealing net neutrality paid people to make fake comments to say, let the internet be run by the broadband companies, essentially.
Nice. That's crazy. I like this bit about they hired someone else to do it, so they had no direct knowledge, so they had deniability. I mean, come on. You still spent $4 million.
Which is really not all that much. You look at how much election campaigns spend in disinformation. Like, that's a pretty small drop in the bucket for ISPs, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest because
the money they would stand to make if they could basically have control over the content that flows over your internet connection.
It's still
by control, I mean priority, right? Like,
yeah,
if it's AT&T, their services get great bandwidth, so you have to subscribe to their services. Like, what is they own a satellite company. What is it? The satellite TV company? Dish? Is it Dish?
Dish, Comcast. I don't know. One of them.
One of them, right? And basically what that means is if you consume your content over services that AT&T owns, but you want to use Netflix bandwidth is shitty, but AT&T services are awesome. And if you want Netflix to be faster, you can pay us an extra $20 a month, and you can get Netflix and Hulu and
it's just that's a dirty, slippery slope.
It's awful. So bad. It's awful. It's bad.
I didn't even know it was still a thing going on, honestly.
I didn't either. But apparently they shined a light on themselves, which makes them look kind of shady, which I think is a good thing for us, right? To show that there are not good intentions happening here.
Hey, speaking of net neutrality, did you blow up the wiki?
I did not do it on purpose, but yes, I have made people aware that it is down. Yes.
Will it come back? Or
it will come back.
Okay.
I can't tell you when, but there are people working on it while we're doing the show.
All right.
Yeah.
Inquiring minds on the Discord want to know.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was not on the Drobo. It's okay.
It was not on the Drobo. No. So this is another interesting debate, the segue from net neutrality. So police caught one of the web's most dangerous pedophiles. If you read the details of this case, I mean, it makes you sick to your stomach to read it. Just the number of accounts in there is just staggering. Apparently this believe was investigation primarily in the UK. But basically what they were saying is they caught someone who was just one of the most heinous pedophiles and had multiple phones, multiple social media accounts, not something like 90 people, many of them obviously children, just awful. But the way they were able to get the evidence against this person to actually arrest them was being able to monitor Facebook messages. As many of us know, Facebook wants to make those messages more and more encrypted across Instagram and Facebook. And it kind of sparked the crypto wars argument of the 90s. And law enforcement's like, if this data was encrypted, we don't know that we'd be able to prosecute this person. And so it brings up that thing. If once these things are encrypted, it makes it harder for law enforcement to be able to collect evidence that allows them to prosecute cases such as pedophiles. On the flip side, there also is privacy that is at stake for people who are not criminals. And, this is how we ended up with things like the Clipper chip. Jeff.
I heard
suggested.
The good old Clipper chip. Wait a minute. There's also the Forteza card.
What was the Forteza card?
Yeah, what is that?
Similar to the Clipper chip.
Huh.
Only spookier.
So here's law enforcement making a case going, don't encrypt this stuff because we're going to have a tough time.
Well, what was the name of the, it doesn't matter. I heard someone speak a couple years ago on this topic in the context of, in the previous administration. And what they were saying was essentially, we have all sorts of rights, we have constitutional rights, but there's even our constitutional rights are limited, and the search and seizure portion of the Bill of Rights, assumes that if there's a suspicion of a crime, the government's going to come in and search for the evidence. So the whole idea of warrants and search and seizure, that type of thing. And this person was suggesting that's got to extend into the electronic realm as well. So he was a proponent for more of the Clipper chip type of thing, which was the back door, the master key that would decrypt all the messaging, which is essentially what the Clipper chip was trying to promote. Mm-hmm. The keys would either that. I'm sorry, that might have been the Forteza card. One was a master key, one was key escrow, so that there would be an independent third party that would be a gatekeeper or key holder that the government could come and say, hey, we suspect that there's a crime being committed. Would you please check out the keys so we can read this person's information and data, that type of thing. I'm certainly not a lawyer, not a constitutional lawyer, but the argument made sense to me in the context of, while we like to think we have absolute freedoms and rights to privacy, because we agree to live under the rules of a country, we happen to live in a better country than most, but we're still subject to, within certain boundaries, having our rights infringed upon, from our perspective, because there's a greater purpose, national security interests or whatever. And usually the trump card is when it comes to pedophilia and crimes against children, whether it's pedophilia or trafficking, human trafficking. Mm-hmm. That's what makes everybody stop and go, yeah, what should we do about that?
That's a hard call, though, because, again, we see how this always goes wrong. People cannot secure the master keys. Like, we know that. There's not an unhackable system out there. Yes, there's government. Some government has some areas that do better than others, but that leads to abuse. That leads to leakage. That can lead to other people getting in and abusing that or stealing it. So there's just no good. In my opinion, I don't see any good reason, even with the case of human trafficking and pedophilia. Like, I hate that stuff, but there's got to be other ways to do this differently. Like hire some damn hackers that are really good and, go after these people rather than just here's a key and like everybody's at risk. Put those people at risk and start targeting them with the pointy end of a spear.
You signing up, Tyler?
I've been trying to find someone that has a pointy spear for me to sign up with for a long time. Problem is all these places have really great people, good intentions, and great programs, but that pointy end of the spear is overwhelmed, and therefore it is not a very pointy spear, and it does not react very quickly. But that's an awkward silence, so I'm open if anybody knows of any pointy spear.
It's a tough problem.
Yeah, and it's whose responsibility is it? Is it the providers? Is it the government? Is it law enforcement? Or some combination? There are all laws that say you're not responsible for what people say on your platform, right? Forget the actual statute that has been tested.
208 or 203, that one?
Something like that, right? And like, whose job is it to, air quotes, police, the content that's on there? At what point do you would encrypt it? There are Photo DNA is a service that's used to detect child pornography and is used by a lot of providers to do that. But the child pornography stuff is on the rise. It's sickening. You talk to any of your friends in law enforcement like I do, and they're like, "This is so many cases all the time." A lot of that's because the internet is a vast space now that they can do that. And this stems back from the days of BBSs. That stuff was going on, and now they've got a much wider platform to do that with. And how do you control that content? How do you discover it, and when it's that large?
So one of the interesting things that was in the article was how WhatsApp, is using metadata and trends that, because the pedophile and other types have a very different behavior than the normal activity on their app, so they stand out, and they're able to run it down without having to worry about breaking the encryption because the behavior just doesn't fit model, and that's where
I would like to call out in the paragraph before WhatsApp is cited. They mention end-to-end encryption, and they cite Phil Zimmerman in Pretty Good Privacy. Technically not an end-to-end encryption solution. It would encrypt the payload and then you sent it.
Right.
Which is
very true. Very true. Yeah, it's payload encryption.
Right.
Yep.
Nitpick, but sorry. It's my crypto moment.
I don't favor models that break encryption and provide backdoors. I just was highlighting that WhatsApp is trying to use analytics based on data they could see to identify problems.
Are they using AI and ML?
Yeah, it sounds like they're using natural language processing as well, because they do also mention in the article that certain languages, such as Hindi, don't respond well to their algorithms.
Oops. It reminds me of many things that I used to do or was exposed to at that 3-letter agency where I used to work, where you
listen to everyone's phone calls.
Even back, no, we did not. Mostly it was radio traffic back in those days, right. and even back then, actually breaking the ciphers, breaking the codes, and reading the underlying messages, was not a terribly common thing for the bigger, more mature nation states. Use your imagination. But there was a whole lot that you could learn from other things,
right?
That were somewhat depicted here without going into a lot of details. I'll give you one example. I might have told this story before on the air, but back when I was there, we had this little skirmish in the desert that was called Desert Shield, and then later Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. So Desert Shield was when Iraq invaded. Gosh, what was it? Kuwait.
Was it? I was going to say Kuwait would have been my guess.
I think it was Kuwait, and so the U.S. amassed troops and sent all sorts of naval ships, and we're hovering, waiting. So Desert Shield was the building up of the troops and deploying them and getting them in place. Desert Storm was when the actual military operations started, and everybody was trying to predict, from a media journalistic perspective, when's Bush? This was Bush Senior. When's he going to pull the trigger? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Some astute reporter in the D.C. area noticed one evening that the lights were on at the Pentagon and a whole bunch of pizza delivery trucks were showing up, and he said, "Ooh, I bet you this is the night." That's stuff that we call traffic analysis or operational security. He saw something different in terms of the behavior, and he accurately predicted shots are going to be fired pretty soon. So there is a lot of other things you can do. So I guess if I'm going to take a stand, I would tend to agree that I don't want to put backdoors in crypto systems or escrow the keys for all the reasons cited. I am of that camp, and there's a lot of other things you can do to get the end results. It makes you work at it, but there are other ways. They just might be a little bit more time consuming and more expensive. This would be an easy route, but easy translates to insecurity and abuse and all sorts of bad things happening. So that's my take on it.
Speaking of bad things happening, Code Red 2.
Oh, so apparently there's a wormable vulnerability in IS HTTP servers.
HTTP protocol on Windows.
Right? I was like, this is Code Red 2.0. Could be.
Yeah.
Very exciting and very scary with ransomware right now.
Yes.
No, I think there was like 55 security holes patched this last go around, which is one of the biggest patches that's happened in recent histories. I think it was 2019, 2020. Since we had something kind of this big, there was 4 or 5 different RCEs with inside of that, and the Wormable one is kind of the most notable. There's some serious. They said it's not a high bar to kind of exploit this. It's at the kernel level, so pretty big deal.
Specially crafted packet to a server utilizing the HTTP protocol stack to process packets, and ultimately leads to execute arbitrary code and take over the affected system.
See, and the thing people don't think about here is they think IIS. Okay, I don't have IIS stood up. But you start to think about some of the Microsoft products you install, like Visual Studio or any of those others.
Oh, that's interesting.
Many of these build and stand up IIS natively.
Yep.
Yeah, this is unauthenticated too. So
it's been a long time since we've seen a really widespread remotely network exploitable entity like that this is going to get interesting. I think
this is a bad time. I mean, as ransomware is so rampant, it seems like it just keeps ramping up and up and up. This is a bad time to have that kind of bug.
Yeah, so go patch, because there's 55 patches to apply, and then that's not even only RCE. You got IE11 vulnerabilities in there.
People still use IE?
I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, it still comes natively with Windows 10. So
no, I thought Edge has been coming with my latest Windows.
It does if you haven't been doing the upgrade path all along. If you do a fresh install, then yeah.
Oh, right. You still have IE because it's there. Buried. They don't remove it when you're upgrading.
Negative.
I've done fresh installs, and I get which, quite frankly, I like Edge as a browser. I'll admit it. I think Edge is really good.
I think Chromium Edge is great. The original Edge was awful.
Yes, I agree. It reached a maturation kind of point for me, and then I started running it on Linux, and I tell you what, it runs pretty damn good on Linux, like better and better. Even in the last 3 months, they've done some serious, every time I patch one of my systems, and I try and be diligent about patching them at least weekly across my 3 Linux systems that I use most regularly. And almost every week they've had an update, at least for the past almost month and a half. And Edge is it's awesome. And anytime I need to dump into an Office 365 app, I use Edge to do that. And it works. It's pretty awesome.
I mean, as soon as Microsoft got out of the browser game and utilized other code for the backend, they got rid of like 80% of their attack surface.
Now, we've seen a lot of 0 days in Chrome.
Right.
You wonder if Microsoft's doing a better job of maintaining that code in more secure basis, right? And particularly those stem from the V8, the JavaScript engine within Chrome. You wonder if Microsoft's doing a better job of that.
So it's kind of interesting, right? Because Microsoft's entire culture has changed with respect to
security, right?
Security and also opening up, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys caught this little Python comment right now, but in November of 2020, Guido van Rossum, the Python author,
does he work for Drop? Where is he? Is it? It's not Dropbox. Is it? Where does he work?
No, he's working at Microsoft.
He is. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting there because we're going to potentially see impacts with regard to Python integration into Windows as well, which is kind of fascinating.
That's interesting to see how it would compare with PowerShell. Yeah.
Now, I don't know where it's going to go, but I'll find the tweet. It was great. I literally was writing courseware, and I was right at the section where I was talking about Python and shellcode injection. And I found this tweet, and it was just like golden. I was like, drop, right into the courseware.
Jeff, I read an article, I believe it was last week, that was advocating for not using Python lists for performance. So they pointed out in Python lists that you take a performance hit for that, and you can mix types in a Python list. They were advocating to use the built-in library for Python arrays, saying that it was better performance and safer to use because you're limited to a type in an array. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, being the Python expert.
Yeah, so I think that's a mixed bag, right? Because one of the things that attracts people, put security aside just for a second.
Sure.
One of the things that really attracts people to Python is that intuitiveness aspect, and the fact that you can mix object types in a Python list is extremely powerful from a programming perspective and extremely intuitive for a lot of people. So I get that, but by the same token, as Python is shifted from Python 2 to Python 3, there's actually been an increasing move to, or I probably should say decreasing, but to do away with the use of Python lists as a return object type for various built-in functions.
Yep.
If you look at the range function, if you look at the map function, if you look at various the dictionary keys function, the dictionary iterator.
Yeah, it's been more dictionary focused than list focused. Yeah.
Right. They all much less list focused, and one of the reasons for that was that there was not only there was a slight performance impact, but the bigger issue was a memory consumption impact, because a lot of these various built-in functions, as well as the various modules, were returning list types and having to allocate a lot more memory, either on the stack or on the heap, based depending on the context, as your script was executing. And so it became much more popular to use iterators, which gave you a better performance and didn't consume as much memory.
But security-wise, though, if you're writing code, if you're going to a traditional array, which Python does implement, which actually I've never used, I don't think, in Python.
I've never used an array in Python.
Right? Yeah. But if you're doing arrays and you have different types, now you're talking about multi-dimensional arrays, and that complicates your code and potentially opens up security vulnerabilities.
Yeah, potentially does, right? Here's the other aspect of this that I hadn't gotten to is that Python has never been a strongly typed language, right? It's always been fairly
moving in that direction, though.
Yeah, it is. There are areas where it's saying, well, we have, for example, now with functions, you can declare them as a sort of a type suggestion, if you like, and you can declare return values as a type suggestion. Doesn't necessarily enforce it. But it is tending to move that way. But I'm not sure that it'll ever get there fully, because I think that sort of moves against the original design intent of the language.
To make it easier to use and code and faster.
Yeah, exactly. The original zen of Python was, intuitive, easy, simple, that's been the very gestalt of it, and I don't think that's going to change. I think Guido and the team have still really kept that at the heart of things. And you've also got to remember, historically, Python came out when Guido van Rossum and the people around him were looking at Perl and basically being disgusted by the state of what was in front of them.
Right.
And I can't blame him. I mean,
yeah, well, because it was rare. And my kind of gauge for this, Joff, is with Perl. It was rare to have a Perl project go over 10,000 lines of code, and I think Python is so awesome and beautiful that people did end up with Python projects that were over 10,000 lines of code. And then very quickly you realize that some of those nice things that we do with types in Python are not positive. Now they're a negative once you get over 10,000 lines and multiple developers.
What actually happened was versioning quickly became a significant issue because language features and module changes became a real big, and this is why I always like to say, like, Docker and Python go together, like, like perfect fit, because you can fix your Python version in time with a Docker container. And
I've done that. I did that with our internal app with PPWorks. I used Docker to take us to 3 and create that environment. And it wasn't as bad as I freaked out. I was freaking out that we had to do it. But after I did it, I was like, actually, that wasn't that bad. And our project is over 10,000 lines of code. And I was like, it wasn't that bad, actually.
It's like any tool, right? Python has its place. It is a fantastic proof of concept tool. It is a fantastic high-level, get-it-done quickly kind of tool.
Yep.
But, there are times when you need to go deeper, when you need a compiled language, when you need more robust typing, and Python's not necessarily a tool for you when you get to that point.
And while we're on the subject and security related too, what is your kind of gauge on the conversion from Python 2 to Python 3? Have a lot of projects moved? And what's the security risks as it stands today between Python 2 and 3? If you're still running 2, you're not getting updates anymore, right?
Yeah, I think you're in a riskier situation if you're still running 2. They will do maintenance releases of 2 if there's a horrendous security issue detected, but they're not.
Yeah, and like so libraries, IP address and netmask both had vulnerabilities in the Python libraries. And so did they fix those in 2 as well?
I don't know whether they backported and fixed those in 2. I don't know. But look, I mean, it comes down to anything in security, right? If you're going to use legacy code, then you're going to be exposed to the issues of not patching legacy code. I mean, that's just going to be a fact, and you're going to be better off in 3. I mean, 3's has got the advantage of having some type safety introduced. Has got the advantage of tightening up a lot of the memory usage and a lot of the initial vulnerabilities. I mean, some of the early vulnerabilities in 2 was essentially related to evaluation of Python statements in certain input scenarios, right? And that's been removed in 3. The raw input versus the input function, those sorts of things. So I think it comes down to the same old things that we've seen in any software ecosystem. I hate to use that word, but so like Microsoft operating systems, for example. I mean, you want to be stuck in the past, then hey, do that, but you are going to basically have an increasing risk over time.
Yeah. You did a webcast on converting from Python 2 to 3.
I did. It's been a while.
I used that as a reference. I watched that. That was helpful. Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah. Yep. And, there's built-in tools, right?
Yes.
2 to 3. It's actually a tool called 2 to 3, which does a half reasonable job. It doesn't completely do the job, because one of the biggest things that people trip over is the fact that Python 3 represents strings as UTF-8.
Yes.
And Python 2 still uses.
See, but that actually, in my app, and I'm sure a lot of other people too, that actually helped me. I think that's also a great security thing as well, because I think you can run into some trouble there security-wise as well. But that actually helped the usability of my application. And I didn't use the 2 to 3, but another tip there is to use your IDE. PyCharm, likely VS Code, all have linting tools that will like tell you. And I think that's why it wasn't as bad for me, because I had the linting tools that was like when I was coding or looking at a particular function or method or class in my code, I was like, it would tell me like, this code is only going to work in Python 2. It's not going to work in 3, and like put a squiggly red line like underneath it for me. And like we would kind of fix as we go as developers. I think that's a good approach.
Good. That's good. And those IDEs are definitely helpful. I'm pretty big fan of Visual Studio Code, although some stability issues there occasionally on various operating systems. But
check out PyCharm. If you haven't looked at PyCharm, it's awesome. JetBrains makes awesome
I have
tools.
looked at PyCharm, and I may actually go back there. It depends on. So I'm authoring in Golang, C# and Python these days, so I tend to vacillate between all three.
They have a Golang IDE too as well.
Yeah. I find Visual Studio Code there pretty good for Golang. While we're on development, just another story or two. Jenkins attack framework was released, which is interesting because we use Jenkins in our build pipeline today, and that's another like legacy thing. Like Jenkins was all the rage, and then there was a lot of other CI/CD tools out there. But what I thought was neat in this release is that this new framework, it automates and simplifies many common Jenkins attack and introduces some new techniques, which are not like they say it's not 0 days, but there's some attack techniques in here that are not well known in the offensive security community. So if you're on a pen test and you run across Jenkins, or you're using Jenkins in your environment, this is a pretty cool framework. It's called JAF, Jenkins Attack Framework. It came from the folks at Accenture, and is a pretty cool little framework for assessing the security of your Jenkins environment, which I can tell you from first-hand experience, if you've got Jenkins stood up and it's working, and if you're in a DevOps model of any kind of regular release cycle, you don't want to mess with your Jenkins environment because it's automating all of your builds for all your software, and you don't necessarily want to update it. And updating it is not for the faint of heart either. It's a cool framework to look at.
Nice.
And I mean, you get into Jenkins, man, that's a treasure trove for you pen testers out there. You can find some juicy stuff inside of Jenkins. And it would really allow you to control all the code repositories, all that stuff. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. Lee, did you have any stories you wanted to finish out the show with?
I was just looking at that because we covered so much of these. Well, I got a really mundane one, but there's a update your Acrobat readers and stuff, because there's a use after free vulnerability in there.
It's like we're never done finding vulnerabilities in Adobe Reader.
Yeah, I mean, I thought once Flash was gone, the rate would slow down, didn't you?
No, because Flash
Adobe
was a hot
is
mess.
the gift that keeps on giving.
And so just to speak to Flash, I mean, it's not only, I mean, it died a pretty fast death, but it's further being just like killed, right? Like, I don't remember what the article was I read, but like it's gone. Like, no, I think, was it Microsoft that was going to remove it? Someone was going to fully remove it because the browsers largely have removed it. It's not in any, it never really has been like default in any Linux distribution. Apple has never really been big on Flash. I mean, they really never supported Flash. So I mean, like it's deader than dead at this point. But I'm sure there's some people out there that are still trying to run it. We covered some stories about people backporting browsers to still run it, which is kind of frightening.
So there's still Microsoft's dirty little secret called Silverlight, which is essentially Microsoft's version of Flash.
Is that still a thing?
It's still out there. It's not quite dead yet. November.
It's mostly dead.
Mostly dead.
Yeah. It got better. But
Reader's still alive and still finding a lot of vulnerabilities in there.
Yeah. It's crazy. Actually, no, the nice thing is now with there are more and more ways it will keep itself updated, so you don't have to work as hard anymore. But it got a little less aggressive. It used to just go out and update itself in the middle of whatever. Now, if you're doing something, it'll wait till you shut it down before it'll do it. But it's much better than it was, and that's a big help. But still, I wish I don't want to go to an alternative PDF store, but sometimes it's really tempting.
I mean, you wonder, like, if the OS providers have a tool that's built in that does it, like, do you really need Adobe Reader? The problem is that some of the OS tools kind of suck at rendering PDFs.
Well, you got things like signing PDFs and fillable PDFs and additional, like, being able to do typewriting with inside of a PDF. Like, none of those come with just the reader, which is a lot of PDF usability is kind of doing. Which, why is that general functionality not built into the OS? Maybe because they see what a shit show Adobe PDF has been. Maybe
it can't be easy to code that securely, right? I mean, because you're trying to render data, and right. I mean, look, we see that in the JavaScript engine, we see that in the browsers, we see that anything that's rendering data. I go back to Snort, right? I mean, has to process all of this unstructured data. You don't know what you're going to get, and parsing all of that. I remember Marty saying that, like, that's the biggest pain in the ass with Snort is all of those processors of data. We see that in serialization vulnerabilities in Java. It just, taking in that unknown kind of data always leads to vulnerabilities, and I think Adobe has suffered from that in Reader, and they likely had some really crappy legacy code that they're still uncovering vulnerabilities in.
Yeah. Every now and then I think about when we first started playing with PDFs 20 plus years ago, and for some reason we thought they were read-only.
Yeah.
And boy, was that wrong. They actually do have one that is. It's called PDFA, PDF Archive. It's supposed to live till the end of the Republic, which could happen any 4 years, but okay. But and that really is, you can't alter them. They are, but the rest of them can be altered. Anyway, unless you want to wrap it up, the other thing I was thinking about was the advisory from ACSC on the add-on ransomware.
Well, let's talk a little more about ransomware. You had a lot of ransomware stories in there. Yeah.
Well, this one was interesting because they were I can't say it. Sorry, the Australian ACSC. Help me, Joff.
Which story is this? Yeah, Joff speaks Australian.
It's my tongue is broken. It's
are you talking about the Australian cybersecurity? Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
ACSC.
They are awesome. They are.
Oh
really
no, they do great work. They do great work.
And so whenever I see a story with ACSC in it, I look twice because they're like, they don't cry wolf. They got their act together.
Yeah. There it is. Australian Cybersecurity Centre. Yeah. No, they're doing really, really good work, and they're hiring too. Maybe it's time to leave the country. Bye, everybody.
But this particular ransomware is targeting. They've mapped out the countries and the sectors it's targeting, and so if you fall into one of these groups, and there's quite a bit of groups, but you could take this information and really make sure you got your shit together, and of course, this particular ransomware is one of those double extortion. They not only encrypt, but they also steal your data and then ransom it back to you.
Their logo and marketing people are doing a pretty good job. Just saying, from in comparison to most of the ransomware, they've got a cool logo.
They do have a cool logo.
Well, you know what it Avaddon is in cybersecurity these days. If it's not got a sexy logo, it's not real.
So this reminded me of something I ran across a couple days ago, that the cyber insurance companies are backing off on paying for ransomware. Remember, you could engage cyber insurance and then they would take care of negotiating and paying it. And there was a report in the first half that came out last September. In the first half of 2020, ransomware reported for insurance claims was up 260%.
It's the first year that insurance companies have actually lost money.
Yeah.
On cyber insurance.
So shockingly, they don't want to insure against ransomware anymore. Tyler, can you explain that one to me?
So there's a big push right now to begin making a minimum bar of acceptable risk when they take on a new policy, and it's hard for them to take on a policy and be able to judge the maturity and risk of an organization. And so when they do that, they're trying to figure out a way to, one, gauge what the risk is to them, and two, have a minimum bar of expectations of security in order to engage in backing them with cyber liability insurance. And that will go down for, what they're able to cover and what they will cover. And I think that's a move in the right direction, because insurance companies do have a lot of latitude in order to make companies do things, because without the insurance, many of the procurement and negotiation and contracting can't go through. They can't do business. And so the insurance companies have and they know, well, some of the good ones know this level of responsibility. They know they have the ability to affect change. And so there's some big initiatives in some of the bigger insurance companies to start making those changes. And I think this is a move in the right direction, because they're not just blanket covering and allowing people to be negligent. They're starting to have to push the bar and force people into doing a better job.
Do you think the customers got the message?
I think they will start to when they start to see they can't get insurance, and if they can, it is at a much higher premium if they're not doing better things.
Well, that follows.
I think they're going to find that cybersecurity is not the answer, and I think we've established on this segment certainly that it's reaching that kind of PCI level when it comes to ransomware. That we got PCI because credit card fraud was so rampant. Now we've got ransomware that's so rampant, and unfortunately, the answer is not as simple as it is with, not that PCI is simple, right? But it's not a simple answer to protect against ransomware. I mean, it means you got to have a really good cybersecurity program, and as we all know, that's not an easy thing. It involves process, procedures, technology, collaboration, constant monitoring, and all those things, which is hard. I mean, we already established that cybersecurity insurance companies have a tough time gauging the maturity of the program. It shows you how hard it is to maintain a really good program. And
but again, another initiative that these insurance companies are also providing is through existing customers, or as part of this, is providing them partnerships or means to
be
get
secure.
to that kind of right, like the bar. This is how high you need to start. Here's good starting points. Here's how you do that.
Because like insurance companies don't want you to get into an accident, right? They want you to be a good driver. They want you to not get speeding tickets. They want you to wear a seatbelt and be safe, right?
That's why I see this as one of the few kind of verticals in which a private company that is getting paid could make things much more secure in a quicker fashion. Like, this is something that every company almost has to have. And if they force people to do this, that's how we get like airbags, that's how we get seatbelts, that's how we get driving. Like, they have the ability to affect change. And I think if they do that in the right manner and they use this responsibly, I see them being able to contribute to the overall security in a meaningful manner in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. That will conclude the show for this evening. Over and out.